I wasted 750 hours a year on my commute when I was a corporate employee. When people consider quitting their jobs to start a business, they are very focused on the revenue side of things. Can they replace their employment income? What most people don't consider is they will also be reducing their expenses at the same time. That's what I'm going to talk about in this podcast episode. You'll be surprised by the numbers, so stay tuned. I'm Larry Cornett, and this is Invincible Solopreneurs. So a few years ago, I was doing the math on how much money I've saved by quitting my corporate job back in 2010 and becoming a solopreneur. So now it's been about 15 years. And by my calculations, I have saved approximately $190,000, $190K over the past 15 years. And that number sounds insane. That can't be real, right? It just can't be real. I've done the math multiple times. It didn't seem real to me either. It's kind of mind-boggling. So I'm going to share some of the details with you. So way back in 2010, before I left my last corporate job, I was spending, as I said, 750 hours a year commuting to the corporate campus. And so the way that breaks down is we have about 50 working weeks a year, right? The truth is, I rarely took vacations during the last 8 years of my career. I've talked about that. I'm not saying that was good. That was not good for my mental or emotional health. So I was probably working 52 weeks a year. And we had to work in the office. So I was in the office 5 days a week. You got to remember, remote work wasn't as common back then. And that was especially true if you were a leader. If you're managing a team, leading a team, and I was an executive in my last role, you had to be in the office. We had face-to-face meetings, stand-up meetings with the senior executives, and if you weren't there, that was not good for you. So yeah, remote work wasn't very common. I had to be in the office, and sadly, folks, remote work will not be that common anymore. I know a lot of you are being asked to return to office, those of you that still have jobs, and I'm sorry about that because I love remote work, and it does work. It works really well. So that comes out to be 250 working days a year, 250 days in the office. So I was commuting to my job and then back home again at the end of the day, a long day, on congested Bay Area freeways. I was doing that 5 days a week. So yeah, I was in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. That's where I was living. Now, on a great day, I mean a beautiful traffic day, you can imagine how often that happened. That meant 2 hours a day on the freeway. I mean, if I could fly down the road and get to work, let's say I was like a Sunday morning, sometimes I did work on the weekend, I could get there in an hour. So an hour there, an hour back, so right, 2 hours. Now, on a terrible day, with accidents that backed up traffic for miles, it often would be 4 hours a day. And I know that sounds insane, but if you haven't lived in a place like the Bay Area or Los Angeles, it's probably hard to picture how bad the traffic can be. I mean, even on a okay day, the traffic is backed way up, way up. So yeah, it could be 4 hours, round trip, right? 2 hours to work, 2 hours back. I remember that. And I distinctly remember even longer than that one day. I got stuck on the freeway. There was a big accident. And I was at a place where I couldn't get off the freeway. So I was stuck right there. And I just ended up parking my car. I parked my car and I got out and I sat on the median and just waited for the traffic to start back up again. And I was waiting for hours. I was completely stuck. It was definitely a falling down moment, if you remember that movie. I was like, I wish I could drive my car off the road and get out of here, but I was stuck between the concrete dividers and traffic behind me, traffic in front of me. The guy behind me got out of his car and he sat on his hood and smoked a joint. So he was kind of prepared for relaxing on the freeway if it happened, and it did. So when I did the calculations for this, I split the difference and I said, okay, let's say 3 hours, an average of 3 hours, because there were a lot of 4-hour days and there were some 2-hour days. And that adds up to 750 hours of commuting on the freeway a year. An absolute nightmare. That's one big reason that I left the corporate world and started my own business. So I checked the mileage and the round trip miles to my old corporate campus and then back home. And it added up to 13,000 miles a year on those California freeways. So 13,000 miles. And when I considered the fuel efficiency of the car I had at that time and those miles driven, it added up to spending about, at that time with the fuel cost, $3,000 a year on fuel. So I didn't adjust this. I probably should have for this calculation. Remember my insane number, $190,000? I was using 2010 numbers for fuel prices, and fuel has gone up considerably in California. So we'll just say $3,000 a year. And then I started adding up all the other expenses. And that would include meals, because I had to eat at work or eat out, and I probably should have made more meals to take with me, but I was busy. I was barely sleeping. I was working so many hours. Coffee, spending money on coffee. I mean, there was some free coffee if you wanted to have an ulcer, but if you went to the coffee bar that we had, you had to buy coffee. I had to buy new clothing all the time and take care of it, get dry cleaning. I did that because you got to dress up as an executive, right? You got to be all fancy. Vehicle maintenance and repair was one significant cost because I was putting a lot of miles on my car, and I was sitting in traffic, idling or turning my car off and starting it up again. A lot of, stop and start, rough on the transmission, rough on the brakes, and then other various services, for example, home repairs. I like to DIY. I like to do my own home repairs. I do a lot of that now, but back then I had no time. I was working long hours. I was even working weekends and get back on at night and check my email and get on phone calls because I was supporting, had an international team. So I would have calls with teams in India and China at night, and then calls with teams in Europe in the morning, early in the morning. So yeah, I didn't have time to do home repairs. And so guess what? That's pretty expensive if you have to hire somebody to come in and fix stuff. So all this stuff adds up. And by the time I did an estimate, that was about $10,000 a year, about 10 grand a year for the meals, the coffee, the clothing, dry cleaning, vehicle maintenance, repair services, all that stuff, right? You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how much of that adds up. I mean, have you ever stopped and kept track for a year of the personal expenses that you incur for your job? Money that comes out of your pocket, stuff that's not reimbursed by your employer, covered by your employer. Probably more than you think. You just probably don't pay attention to it. So that was then, and this is now. This is why I'm no longer spending that kind of money. That's why I've saved $190,000, because I've been running my own businesses starting in 2010. I'm a solopreneur. I don't have employees. I don't have an office in town, so I work out of my home office. My commute is walking downstairs with a cup of coffee in my hand, so I no longer have a commute, which, boy, oh boy, getting 2 to 4 hours of my life back every day, oh my goodness. I can't even tell you how magical that's been. And I don't drive on the freeways or highways anymore, so I'm mostly my vehicle, which is a truck, stays parked at home. So my fuel costs are absurdly low. I mean, crazy low. I have to remember to start my truck just to keep the battery charged. I only drive a few miles a month to go check. I have a mailbox in town for the business, so I check it once in a while, once a month or once every couple of months. That's it. All my meetings are done remotely. I have clients all over the world. I have clients I've never met in person. So we do Zoom meetings or phone calls. I work on my laptop or my phone. So I don't have to drive anywhere for meetings. I don't have to meet anyone. I don't have to go commute to town. I don't have to go to an office. None of that stuff, right? And I eat at home. So we rarely eat out. We don't eat fast food. So I make my own breakfast and lunch, and we cook dinner. And that's an incredible savings. No more of those expensive meals that aren't that great while I'm at work. Going out for lunch, we would do that. A lot of the employees were like, hey, let's go get lunch and have a lunch meeting, and that adds up. Ordering pizza, you name it, even at the cafeteria. So I didn't work at a company where they covered everything. I wasn't some special little Google employee or Meta employee. I had to pay for my meals. And so I eat at home now. No longer have really expensive meal costs. And make my coffee at home. I make excellent coffee. I love coffee and I love making it well. And so I do pour over. I use an AeroPress. And my coffee is better than the coffee I get at Starbucks. I don't like Starbucks. And I used to spend thousands of dollars a year at Starbucks. And I've shared this number with people before, and they think I'm making it up, and they think it's crazy. But have you ever taken a look at your spending habits with Starbucks or wherever you get your coffee? I had a coffee card that I recharged, so I know how much I was spending. It was kind of insane. At the lowest end, it was like $5 a day, and that was rare. There was hardly ever a day that was $5 a day. Because I would grab coffee in the morning, I would get coffee in the afternoon, I'd get another coffee in the afternoon. We'd often grab like a pastry, which I probably shouldn't have done, which is why I got so out of shape and overweight. And I often would buy the coffee and stuff for my employees. So I would have one-on-one meetings because we were trying to get out of the building and go sit in the sun. And so we would sit at Starbucks at a table. And I would buy their coffee for our one-on-one meetings. So I was spending easily $15 a day, probably more. And that was, again, 250 work days a year. And so it ranged from $1,000 to $4,000 a year for buying coffee for myself, my employees, buying a pastry. It adds up, folks. You'd be surprised how quickly it adds up. I do not spend $4,000 a year making coffee at home. So I've saved a ton of money, and it's better. It's actually better. And I no longer purchase lots of new clothing for work. I can't remember the last time I've purchased a dress shirt or a suit or whatever, right? I don't have to do that anymore. I used to have to do that. I had to buy suits and all kinds of stuff because I gave talks at conferences, and especially in New York where people expect you to dress up a little bit differently than the West Coast. So I don't buy new clothing. I don't do any dry cleaning anymore. That's kind of ridiculous. Most of my days are spent in a hoodie and comfortable pants or workout clothes. If I have some kind of a fancy Zoom meeting, I throw on a button-up shirt, and for the camera, that's about it. So yeah, that's been a ton of money that I've saved. And then my vehicle repairs have dropped almost nothing. I got rid of my expensive to maintain car, and I've talked about this before. I made the big mistake thinking I was Mr. Fancy Pants, and I bought a BMW. I mean, how ridiculous, how stupid. That gets really expensive to repair. BMW repairs are outrageously expensive. I had to get new windshields, a transmission, had to get an engine repair, electrical work done. I mean, oh my goodness, so much money. So now I drive an 1987 Toyota pickup, which I love. I absolutely adore that little truck. And my repair costs for that are virtually nothing. I can't remember the last time I had to have any work done on it. Yeah, probably because I barely drive. I do not drive very often. And when I do drive, it's only a few miles to go check the mail. I don't do long commutes or drive for 2 hours anymore, 4 hours. So the wear and tear on my vehicle is very minimal. So no wonder my repair costs have dropped so much. And all of those other incidentals and expenses and stuff that comes up when you have a corporate job and you don't have time, like hiring somebody to do repair work and stuff that comes up with the commute, all of that vanished. So I have been saving an incredible amount of money. And another bonus, I've talked about this before, I now have time to work out every day. I was in pretty bad shape. By the time I left the corporate world, I was overweight and not feeling good and not feeling healthy and out of breath and just not taking care of myself. I was on the fast path to an early death, I'm sure of it. So now I get to work out every day. I make time for that because my schedule is my schedule. And I've talked about this. As a solopreneur, you can do day theming and time blocking, and you can make time for yourself, for whatever you need, to work out, to meditate, do yoga, journal, eat healthier. I eat healthier now. I can take care of myself. So I lost like 40 pounds. I've talked about that. I've lost 40 pounds and gotten to the best shape of my life. And I still work out every day. I just worked out today. So I like to lift weights. I go running. We go skiing, stuff like that. So it's kind of incredible. I mean, I love remote work. I think remote work works. And I've fully embraced that with my business. I'm living proof. I have clients all over the world, and it has to be remote. I'm not going to fly to Sweden to meet with one client and Costa Rica to meet with another client and China to meet with another client. Don't have to do that. And I love solopreneurship. I like partnering with people. I talked about that recently. But we partner on projects. They're not my business partners. They don't own part of my company. We're not a corporation. We just have an agreement and we work together on a project, and that's great. It's great to be able to do that with people. But I could never return to an office or a workplace. I couldn't work for someone else. It's been pretty amazing. So, I mean, that's not the primary reason I wrote this newsletter and recorded the podcast that you're listening to right now. And I hinted at this in the beginning because I think when people are looking at quitting their job and going to start a business, they run the numbers and they're trying to figure out, how can I replace my income, my employment income? So they're looking at the revenue, how much they can sell things for, how much they need to charge, number of clients and hours of work and all that kind of stuff, which you should do. Absolutely. You should do that. But they are thinking in terms of, what is my burn rate right now as an employee? And burn rate, it's like, what's my expenses? How do I maintain my life and my lifestyle? And if I'm looking at my budget, the kind of money I'm spending. And the thing that people don't consider is you will also be reducing your expenses at the same time that you are generating this income for your business. So yeah, you are going to spend some money to run your business. I mean, you'd be surprised at how little that can be. I wrote an article about that where you could, I think I said, start a business in 30 days with $30, and I'm not kidding. There are a lot of free services out there. There are a lot of low-cost services, and I always say don't spend a lot of money until you're making money. So it doesn't take a lot to run your business. Depends on your business. If you're going to do brick and mortar, you're going to try to open a restaurant or a bar, you need to buy some inventory. Yeah, there's going to be some expenses, but with a kind of information business or knowledge worker business, services like I'm doing, your costs are pretty low. And what you have to remember is even those expenses are business expenses. They're not personal expenses. So, as such, they are tax deductible. These are the things you have to buy and the monthly subscriptions and software or whatever you need to have to run your business. So that is a business expense. It's tax deductible and it reduces your taxable income. That is not true for personal expenses. That is not true for the expenses you incur on your own as an employee. So that money I was spending as an employee could not be treated as a tax deduction. In fact, very, very few workers. It's a very short list. I included a link in the newsletter. So if you go to newsletter.invinciblesolopreneurs.com, this is issue 123. I wasted 750 hours a year on my work commute. Very few workers are allowed to deduct unreimbursed employee expenses. That is all thanks to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. So we lost that. And if it depends on how you do your deductions, if you itemize, or if you take, the standard deduction, and it often makes no sense, even when we could do it, to try to deduct those. So, yeah, that makes a huge difference when you can take your expenses as a business owner and deduct them. So when you run the numbers on that business that you're thinking about building, and if you're listening to this podcast, you either have a business or you're thinking about building a business, you may not need to make as much as you think to replace your current income that you have as an employee, because your expenses are going to be lower. You're going to get rid of some expenses, and the expenses you add are going to be business deductions. So take some time and sit down and do the math. Calculate how much your 9-to-5 job is currently costing you. And that can be mentally, it can be emotionally, but also financially, especially financially. We often don't do that math. So over the coming weeks, if you're still employed and you have a job, think about what that job is costing you. And if you'll be able to free yourself of that expense when you quit that job and start your own business. It's an interesting exercise. So yeah, if you go to newsletter.invinciblesolopreneurs.com, you can read more about this and check out the links. Kind of nice to recover those 2 to 4 hours a day and to not be spending $190,000 over the last 15 years for a job that was draining my soul. Anyway, I wish you the best of luck with planning your business. Make sure you do these calculations and see how it's really going to work out for you. Until next time, I wish you the best of luck with building the business of your dreams.